Hi there, and welcome to the Entrepreneur's Therapist podcast. I'm your host, Shulamit Berlev Tov, and I'm the Entrepreneur's Therapist. You can call me Shula for short. My pronouns are she and hers. This is the podcast for business owners, solopreneurs, micropreneurs, freelancers, and self employed folks who want support for riding the emotional roller coaster of running a business. I'm on a mission to mitigate the entrepreneurial mental health crisis and transform the entrepreneurial ecosystem to include the whole human in business. I do that through this podcast, of course, and also through speaking, teaching, and consulting, and working one-to-one with women business owners to support their mental and emotional well-being in an era of relentless stressors that can make you want to lose your crap on the daily. This podcast is being recorded on lands that have been and are still stewarded to this day by the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Land acknowledgements are calls to action from Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and this is your call to action to find out whose land you're on and to share that with others, and to take what other actions you can toward reconciliation, because the harms caused by settler colonialism are ongoing. Today, I'm discussing transforming I can't into I can. So last week, Laura Sinclair and I was a guest on her podcast, This Mother Means Business, and we were talking about what I can't means. And she said she often hears clients say, I can't do more. I can't take a step back. I can't take time for myself. And I have to admit, I've had the same experience where women clients come to me overstressed, overwhelmed, and want support. And the challenge for this, for alleviating their stress, coping with their stress, is that they feel blocked about making changes. They have a sense that they can't make the changes that they need in order to feel better. Have you ever thought I can't? Have you ever felt ashamed or frustrated or sad because of that? Well, first of all, as I say, almost every time I come on the podcast, I guest anywhere, anytime I speak or write, if that's the case, there's nothing wrong with you. As with everything in human experience, while it might not appear to make logical sense, there's usually a good reason for what's happening. So I invite you to take a moment and say to yourself, maybe you might like to place a gentle hand on your chest, just like I'm doing if you're watching in the video, and say to yourself, there's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with me. There are good reasons for thinking I can't. And if when you hear me say there are good reasons for thinking I can't, you're like, oh, come on, right? You roll your eyes and scoff. Well, if you have a hard time believing that there are good reasons for thinking that you can't, I invite you to engage your curiosity and continue to listen. So, what does I can't really mean? It shows up in a number of different ways. And the first one is from overwhelm. From a place of overwhelm, you have a sense of freeze or flop in your organism, and the words that come are, I can't. Often people think, I can't right now, in this moment, they're stuck. When we're overwhelmed, we can have trouble mobilizing enough resources to think creatively. Our emotional experience takes the fore, and we find ourselves either in a frozen or collapsed state. And these are the responses we would expect people to have when they're overwhelmed. So if you're having them, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just that something needs to happen first before you can take some sort of action. In situations like these, I recommend what I call emotional first aid, so you can free up your energy and get mobilized. So the very first step is to place your awareness on your breath for a moment or two. And I'm going to do that now. I invite you to do it with me. I'm placing a gentle hand on my belly, but you might like to place a gentle hand on your heart. Just letting your breath come and go as it does. And then you can acknowledge what's happening. You can say something to yourself like, oh, I'm noticing I'm overwhelmed. I'm noticing I'm overwhelmed. And no wonder I'm thinking I can't. That's what happens when you get overwhelmed. Emotional first aid means also caring for your emotional state in the moment. So after you've taken a moment to acknowledge what's happening, you might take some next steps like having a good cry, journaling it out, calling a friend to rant, making a note to talk to your therapist at your next appointment, or calling them up and saying, hey, I need to book in right now, going for a run. All of these are ways that you can make room for your emotions in the moment. Of course, in the long run, there are probably many factors that are contributing to the sense of overwhelm. And of course, taking formal time with professional support to unpack them will address this particular situation of overwhelm so that you don't face it again. Or if you do, you'll have some tools and it won't have the same power to block you like it once did. Another source of I can't is from what we would call blocks or resistance. So traditional approaches would encourage us to push through or overcome what gets labeled as blocks or resistance. These attitudes imply that we're somehow at fault and need merely our will to move forward. But I'm sure you know, if will was all there was, if will was all it took to move forward, no one would ever be stuck, right? And I'm sure you see all around in your life and the lives of others, lots of people feel stuck lots of times. Just like the collapse and freeze responses, we can assume that what gets called a block or resistance is here for a good reason. Our organisms have their own intelligence about what's needed for our life forward energy to be able to express itself in life-serving ways. So when we assume blocks or resistance are here for a good reason, we can get unstuck. We can move from I can't to a sense of possibility. Maybe there might be possibility here. So in my experience, blocks or resistance come because they hold information that it would be helpful for us to know. Sometimes it's also about what's needed to help keep us safe. So a first step, again, is to acknowledge what's happening. Oh, I'm noticing something in me is feeling stuck. It seems like something's blocking me. Or I'm noticing a part of me is saying I can't. And then you can engage curiosity, right? You can say something like, well, it's clear that I can't. And there's a good reason to be here. Something, I don't know what, needs to happen in order for me to move forward. And I'm curious, like, I wonder, what might that be? Right? You bring a sense of wonder and curiosity or inquiry, as opposed to the tone of voice like, it's clear that I can't, and something needs to happen. What the heck is it? Right? That's a very confrontational and like it makes me think of interrogation, right? Whereas when you can say, oh, geez, I'm noticing something's feeling stuck, right? Part of me saying I can't, it's clear, right? I'm stuck, I can't. And I wonder what's happening. Like, I guess something needs to happen. And I wonder, what might that be? Right? The whole tone of voice. And you might notice the impact of that tone of voice on your experience as you listen to the two, one after the other. So then once you've engaged your curiosity, you might like to think about what might be the thing that needs to happen first in order for you to be able to move forward. You might like to write about it. You might like to document what it wants or needs you to know. You could talk it over with a friend. Another way to think of blocks or resistance, as I said, maybe they come because there's something that we need to know, or because there's fear. With fear-related blocks, you could think about them as safety guardians. You could think of them as safety guardians that are coming in to say, I want to make sure, stop for a minute. That's what they're saying. Stop, you can't. I want to make sure that nothing bad is going to happen to you here. So we need to stop right now and do something first before we do the thing I can't because I'm afraid. And then using the same processes I've outlined above, you say hello to the part that's afraid. You let it know it's here for a good reason. that it's here for your safety in this case, right? That's a safety guardian come to protect you. And then you can be curious about what the safety guardian needs you to know that you might have to do first in order to be able to move forward. Now, sometimes I can't has its roots in what I call a brutal truth. In my work with women clients who are in heterosexual relationships with men and have children, there's sometimes what I call a brutal truth that must be faced. Change will upset the apple cart. Change can threaten the delicate balance that many women, and especially women business owners, have to manage. Their responsibilities, as determined by their roles in their relationships, are many: mother, wife, adult daughter, sibling, business owner, friend, all those. And attempting to fulfill all those roles as they perceive they need to be, or as the people with whom they are in relationship perceive they need to be fulfilled, requires a lot of finesse. And if any one thing changes, then it threatens this whole delicate balance. So, with good reason, many women are not willing to make changes because their highest value is keeping peace in their relationship with their husband. The consequences, right? They're saying to themselves, the consequences of what I'm considering doing would have such an impact on my family, or such an impact on the family balance, or such an impact on the balance I have with my beloved, my spouse, that I'm unwilling because the cost is too high. That impact would be too severe. Then, so that family balance will take precedence, but the person often won't say that, right? Because it's hard to see that dynamic. So they'll just say, I can't. And this is why I call it the brutal truth. It can be very hard to acknowledge the dark or downside of an intimate heterosexual relationship, and especially one where there are kids. It's hard to name how power and gender plays out in your relationship, in particular in your relationship, in your marriage with a man where there's kids, and the man's needs or privilege, or your need to keep peace in the relationship, take precedence over your own personal needs and the needs of your relationship. And a way forward is to acknowledge this brutal truth. Many powerful women feel shame about this. They think, I'm a strong woman. Admitting that I'm like, my priority is not rocking the boat, or that I'm putting his needs before mine, or putting my needs for peace in my relationship before my business, means I'm not the strong woman that I'd like to be. And the truth is, you can be a strong woman and still be stuck in this dynamic. And you may decide that that's okay, that that's how you want things to be. And at the same time, when you acknowledge that that's what's going on, when you acknowledge the hard things, afterwards, with all the cards on the table, a way forward that actually works might reveal itself. Now, sometimes I can't comes from material conditions. The person who's saying it actually can't. Sometimes it's just not a mindset issue. Sometimes I can't is a material fact. Like there might be an unsupportive spouse or family that creates obstacles. Sometimes there are childcare needs. Sometimes there isn't access to funding or to the skills needed. Sometimes you have the skills, but there has been such gatekeeping to formal education that would give you the piece of paper needed that is a block as well. Sometimes chronic illnesses have to be taken into account. Sometimes systems of oppression play a role in the fact that people can't. So many times, external systemic issues are at the root of I can't. Having childcare responsibilities or a chronic illness, for example, aren't in and of themselves a problem. But when we live in a society of systems that favor childless men or men with wives, or able-bodied folks, or white folks, or neurotypical people, to name just a few examples, then those of us who don't conform sometimes encounter insurmountable obstacles. In this case, again, curiosity and compassion are our friends. Compassion here looks like not blaming yourself for the I can't that has its roots in systemic issues. It's not about you, right? It's not your fault. The fact is that you very well could if conditions were different. The issue is not it's not internal ability, individual ability, but external conditions. Curiosity here is also a compassionate move. Getting curious about what it is outside you that's affecting you can help at the very least depersonalize the block, right? It gets you off the hook of blame and shame. But also it might help you identify some systemic supports that are available, or some, when you see what the systemic barriers are, rather than saying, I have to change me, you can look at what's out there and figure out maybe some alternative ways, the ways you can get around those barriers, alternative ways to accomplish what it is that's currently blocked. Another way that I can't shows up is as a result of habit. This is a very powerful manifestation of I can't. We are conditioned to say, I can't. It's a way of being inoffensive. We're taught to say things like, well, I can't make it to your party. I'm sorry, I can't make it. Because saying I'm choosing to stay home to prioritize rest is perceived as rude and hurtful, when in fact, it's just simply honest and direct. But we live in a culture where direct is equated with rude and nice is what is prioritized. But we all have heard how nice kills, particularly in the context of white folks being nice in the face of harms being caused to others. So a journey toward I can involves becoming more honest and direct. I'm a certified trainer in nonviolent communication, and NVC consciousness informs everything I do, all my work, all my thinking. It's my unifying theory, if you want to put it like that. And Marshall Rosenberg, the originator of nonviolent communication, says we are dangerous when we are not conscious of our responsibility for how we behave, think, and feel. I would tweak that a bit to say, not that I disagree, but in this context, I would tweak that a bit to say that when we are not conscious of our capacity to choose, we cause harm, mostly to ourselves, but also to others. We can never know if something is possible or not when we don't take responsibility, right? And that's the way we harm ourselves. We cut ourselves off, before we get to where we might want to go, because we deny the possibility of getting there when we say, I can't. We can replace language that implies lack of choice. We can replace language, I can't language, with language that acknowledges choice, that includes choice. To do this, you could experiment with replacing I have to with I choose to. So for example, instead of saying I have to be home early because my husband won't like it if I'm late, you can say I choose to come home early because I value keeping the peace. And it places the focus on your capacity to choose, your empowerment in the situation, because you're meeting values that you have for keeping the peace. Now, a little aside, I'm talking about power and gender in heterosexual relationships. I'm not talking about abusive relationships. That's a different situation. I'm not inviting you to use any of this kind of reframing language in order for it to make it possible for you to accept being in an abusive relationship. That's a different situation. So the language we use shapes our perception of reality. So changing how we use our language can have a powerful impact on our thoughts and beliefs, and even on our emotions. Saying I can't leaves you stuck and disempowered. So then you get, emotions come up: shame, blame, frustration. I can't functions as a kind of semantic stop sign. Amanda Montell, in her book Cultish, awesome book, by the way, calls these kinds of phrases verbal sedatives because they effectively slow or suspend critical thinking. And if you think about it, I can't, that's just like dismissive. Somebody makes a suggestion, or you see something in a book that looks appealing to you and you just throw your hands up and go, well, I can't, right? You're stuck. You're not stopping to think critically about this. It's just done. So quite literally, the words we use determine how we think, and as a result, how we view ourselves and the world. I can't stops you in your tracks. It eliminates possibilities and hides the fact that there may indeed be something you can do. So, in order to see possibilities, I invite you to experiment with replacing I can't with I'm choosing not to. For example, again, for another example, I can't afford that becomes I'm choosing not to pay that amount because it will upset the sustainability in my business. Now, in my business, I often encounter, I'm a Canadian, so I earn in Canadian dollars for the most part. So I earn 30% less, and then the majority of service providers with whom I do business are based in the US. So I end up, so I earn 30% and pay less and pay 30% more. And for a long time, I have had this inner dialogue around something being the matter with me because I can't pay what they're asking for their services. And I've taken on the practice of saying, thank you for letting me know what your fee is. I'm celebrating 100% that your wonderful choices about sustainability in your business. And I would joyfully pay you that money. And I'm choosing not to work with you right now because to pay that amount would upset the sustainability of my business. My business revenue at this time doesn't support that expenditure. So it's shame-free, fact-based, doesn't blame them or imply that there's anything wrong with their pricing, and doesn't blame or shame me by implying that there's something wrong with the fact that I can't pay, right? It's just truth. I'm choosing not to pay that amount because it'll upset the sustainability in my business. And sustainability is one of my highest values, especially for my business and my life. And this has changed a lot about, in the 10 years that I've been working in this field and having support in my business, most of which has been paid in US dollars. This has really changed my experience of myself as powerful and in a place of choice around what I do and want to do in my don't want to do in my business. So doing this with your everyday language over time can build a sense of empowerment, choice, and capacity, a sense of I can, while at the same time saying no to things. It also helps you see, own, and prioritize your needs. Now, sometimes I can't comes from a past experience or trauma. You may have a lifetime of experience that has taught you that you can't. People who encounter barriers and get stuck because this world isn't inclusive of folks with physical or mental challenges or who don't in some way conform to the dominant culture may have been told all their lives that they can't, or they may have tried very, very hard, but without the appropriate accommodations, they encounter barriers that prevent them, and they internalize this as something wrong with them, and they can't, because they may not see the barriers, or the others talking to them don't see these barriers, and the individual gets blamed for being stuck. From a place of privilege, it's assumed that moving forward is easy, right? And that's why somebody else will say, well, you just do blah, 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 because from their perspective, it's easy for them. And all you have to do is just pull up your socks and do it. Well, if only it were that easy, right? Many of us neurodivergent and chronically ill folks have plenty of desire, willingness, intelligence, and aptitude. And if that were all it took, I swear to God, we wouldn't struggle. I'm sure you know that. The same goes for anyone who has less privilege by virtue of the systems of oppression in place. But it's hard when you've heard all your life that you can't, and you're blamed for being unable, or you literally couldn't